Hey, hello, hi, good morning. It's Monday. We've got a fresh week to start new and learn some new stuff. I'm excited. Hope you're excited. What are we doing today? Today is going to be kind of different. It's almost like we're going to do a little history lesson today. We're going to learn about this man with a really weird name to explain the basic principles of heredity, whatever the heck that means. So you should have already done your bell ringer. I hope you read it closely because there's more than one answer. So don't just pick A or B or C. You're going to have multiple answers for this question. So read it carefully and, of course, explain how you know it's right because you're smart like that. So let's go ahead and dive into these guided notes. You should have your PowerPoint pulled up and again type in as I type. Okay, so what's that word that I just said? Heredity. What is that? So heredity is the passing of traits from parents to offspring. This is what we've already talked about. We already know this. Your traits didn't just pop out of thin air. They got passed down to you from your parents. So how did we find out about this? How do we know that our traits come from our parents? Well, here's where our history lesson comes in. A long time ago, more than 150 years ago, there was an Austrian monk. Let me pump the brakes here. Austria, if you don't know where that is, it's all the way over here. Here's us. I hope you know that. Over here, close to like Germany in that area, is Austria. And there was this monk. What's a monk? A monk is somebody who's like super religious. If you know what a nun is, it's kind of similar to a nun. They basically devote their whole life to religion. Sounds interesting to me, but that's what this guy did. And his name was Gregor Mendel. Weird name, I know. Why are we talking about him? What's so special about this Austrian monk? He is known as the father of genetics. Genetics, you might recognize, there's that word gene that we keep talking about. Think about genes when you hear genetics. Genetics is just the study of how your traits are passed down from parents to offspring. So basically, Mendel is this guy who discovered a whole lot of information that we are talking about in this class. So you can thank him for all of your test questions, all of our lessons. It's because of this guy. So what did he do that's so special, and what did he do to help him learn more about heredity and genetics? So what he did was he studied genetics by performing an experiment with pea plants. Kind of weird. So why did he use pea plants? Why this? So pea plants reproduce quickly, so they create new pea plants in a short period of time. So if he's studying traits that move from one plant to another, he doesn't have to wait like 10 years because he wouldn't make much progress with that. Pea plants make new pea plants quickly, so he can go through it pretty fast. They also have observable traits. So what does that mean? If you look at this table, here are the different traits a pea plant can have, and they're very different from one another and very specific. So, for example, a seed shape can either be round or wrinkled. There's no really in between. It's either one or the other. And you can see the difference clearly. Same with seed color. There's yellow and green. It's obvious when a pea is either yellow or green. It's easy to observe. It's easy to see. So what did he do with these pea plants? What he did was he took two sets of plants with two different seed pod colors. So here we go, pod colors. He took a plant that's green and he took a plant that's yellow and he cross-pollinated them. All that means is he had them reproduce together. That's what that means. They crossed. So if you hear me say cross, that means that they are reproducing together. They cross-pollinated. So he made a green pod-colored pea plant reproduce with a yellow pod-colored pea plant. Pod-colored pea plant. That's like a tongue twister. Okay, so what did he find in this experiment? What happened? So the first round of offspring that these two pea plants produced, he called these the first generation. Makes sense to me. You'll see that we often call first generation after a cross F1 because scientists are lazy and we don't feel like writing out first generation. So if you see F1, it just means first generation, the first round of offspring. So when he cross-pollinated the yellow pea pod plant and the green plant, he noticed that every single offspring in the first generation turned out yellow. So the green color kind of disappeared. The green didn't seem to get passed down to the first generation, which is weird because you'd think it'd be 50-50. Maybe you'd get one yellow plant, one green plant, one yellow plant, one green plant, but no, they were all yellow. So Mendel saw this and he said, you know what? The yellow color must be more powerful than the green. It overpowered that green color and it dominated what's going to be shown in the offspring. So he called the yellow trait the dominant trait because it dominated that green color. Now, because the green seemed to fade away and it disappeared, Mendel called this trait the recessive trait. So in this scenario, he said yellow is dominant, it's more powerful, it's what's going to win. Green is recessive, so it's going to kind of lose, like it's not going to be shown in the first round of offspring. Okay, this wasn't the end of his experiment. What did he do next? So Mendel saw this and he was like, this is weird, I'm going to try something else. So what he did was he let this first generation reproduce together. So the yellow was reproducing with the yellow, with the yellow, with the yellow. They weren't reproducing with any green plants. He named the offspring or the children of these plants the second generation because it came after the first. So again, you'll probably see that as F2 because again, scientists were kind of lazy. We don't want to write out second generation. So what happened was a little freaky. Again, only yellow plants were reproducing with each other, but when they had their offspring, like 1/4 of them seemed to be green, which is confusing because the green was supposed to disappear. So what happened there? And we know that the green color didn't just magically reappear, like something scientific, something official must have happened here. So he had 3, let's say out of 4, he had 3 yellow plants, 1 green plant. So Mendel decided clearly these yellow plants up here in the first generation must have carried information with them to produce a green plant, but we just couldn't see that by looking at them. So it's almost like they had this secret little thing in their back pocket that made green plants, but they weren't revealing that. You could only see the yellow. So he decided that these plants must have 2 factors that determine a trait, one from each parent. So we could see the one factor, which was yellow, up here in the top. I'm pointing at the screen like you can see where I'm pointing. Up here at the top first generation, one factor for yellow at least, and they had a factor for green hidden. We couldn't see it. They weren't revealing that to us. So it turns out that what he hypothesized is totally true. These factors are those segments of DNA that we keep talking about called your genes. So your genes come from your parents, and that's what determines what we see, your phenotype. The different versions, and again, we talked about this in our last lesson, the different versions of a gene that you can have are called alleles. Okay, let's take a breath. I'm throwing a lot of information at you, I know. I'm sorry. So, to slow it down a little bit, remember you have your genes over here. They are a small section of your DNA, and your genes came from your parents. Now, a gene's going to code for one specific trait, like, for example, over here we have eye color or hair color. It's going to code for one trait. Now, obviously, there are different versions of traits that you can have. So if you have your gene for eye color, you can have brown eyes, you can have blue eyes, green eyes, gray eyes. Those different versions of that trait, that's your allele, okay? Same thing for hair color. You can have a gene for hair color, and the different versions or alleles could be blonde, red, brown, black, whatever. So for each gene or each trait, you are going to get one allele from a father, one allele from a mother. We've kind of already talked about that before. So your combination of alleles, because you get one from each, so you're going to have two alleles. Your combination is your genotype, because remember we talked about how you can see gene, and remember, okay, actual combinations on your genes, that's your genotype, and your genotype will determine what you see, or the phenotype. So backing up a little bit, up here, all of these yellow plants have the phenotype for yellow. We are seeing the color yellow. So their genotype, or the combination of alleles from their parents, obviously code for yellow seeds. But this seed down here has the combination of alleles that would make a green plant to have the phenotype that is green. Okay, so what does the combination of alleles, how does your combination of alleles determine what the phenotype is going to be? So if you have the dominant allele, and remember the dominant allele is what is going to show up, it's going to win out. So in this case here, like the yellow is the dominant color because it wins, it overpowers the green. The dominant allele is what you're going to see in the phenotype if it's present. So if you have just one dominant allele, you are going to see that dominant allele expressed in the phenotype. So for example, if you look at these roses, capital R, and we always call a dominant allele, or we always represent the dominant allele with a capital letter because it's big, it's going to win. So over here we have a capital R present, so we're going to see a red rose because the dominant allele is for red. Same thing over here. Even though we don't have two dominant alleles, we have at least one, so you're going to see the red color expressed. You will only see the recessive expressed if you don't have a dominant present. So if one dominant allele comes in, it's going to overpower the recessive. Once no dominant alleles are present, that recessive allele, it's that time to shine, it's going to show up in the phenotype. So if you have two copies of the recessive allele, that's when you're going to see it with your actual eyes. So in this case, recessive is the white color of a rose. So since there's no dominant allele present, you have two little r's, two recessive alleles, you're going to see a white rose. So all of these rules, when we say that one dominant allele is going to win out no matter what, that's what you're going to see. We just call this complete dominance because it is completely dominating the recessive allele. Okay, one more slide, one more word. And before we even finish this, I want to say you might be like, whoa, this is a lot of information. This whole week we're going to really practice these words, and once you actually practice it, it's all going to come together in your mind. I promise you. It's pretty easy. Okay, so we have different terms for when you have a genotype that has two of the same alleles, or one dominant or one recessive. We have different terms for those genotypes. So if you have a genotype with two copies of the same allele, so if you have two dominant or two capital letters, or if you have two recessive or two lowercase letters, we call those homozygous. Now we've already talked about this prefix homo. When you see homo, that means same. So homozygous, same letters. You have the same combination, so two capital, two lowercase. On the other hand, if you have one capital and one lowercase, so a big B or a little b, or whatever letter is representing that allele, that genotype is going to be called heterozygous. Hetero is another new prefix that's going to help you remember what this word means. Hetero just means different. It's the opposite of homozygous. Okay. That was a lot of information. Let me go over it Again, real quick, just to make it a little bit more clear. Again, genetics and heredity, it's just talking about the passing down of traits from your parents to you. This was discovered by this monk named Gregor Mendel. He did so by going through this experiment with pea plants. He discovered that there are two different types of traits, a dominant or recessive. If you have a dominant trait, that trait is going to beat out the recessive, so it's what's going to actually be shown in the phenotype. It's what you're actually going to see. But the recessive, they can still carry it with them. So even if they don't express that recessive trait, they could still have it hidden in their genes and can still pass it down to their offspring. So if they get a combination of two recessive alleles, it will show up. Those different factors are called the genes, and the different versions of your genes are the alleles. We've already talked about that. And again, your combination of alleles, that's your genotype, and that determines your phenotype, or what you actually see. As long as you have just one capital letter or one dominant allele, that is what you're going to see in the phenotype. You're not going to see the recessive trait or recessive allele in the phenotype unless you have two copies and no dominant trait or allele is present, and that's what we call complete dominance. And last but not least, if you have two pairs of the same exact allele, so two dominant or two recessive, we call that homozygous because homo means same. Or if you have one of each, we call that heterozygous because they're different. One capital B, one lowercase b. Okay, like I said, this is a lot of new information spinning around in your brain. Tomorrow we're going to really practice it. We're going to practice getting comfy with these terms. It'll come, I promise you, and we're going to practice it all week. Okay, we're not going to throw too much more information at you on Thursday and Friday. We're just going to get a lot of practice with all of this stuff. Okay, if you have any questions at all, hit me up, email me, comment on the Google Classroom assignment, message me on Google Hangout. You can meet with me over Google Meet. You can even have your parents come and schedule an hour in the Wi-Fi classroom, and I can come down physically and help you. There are so many ways I can help you with this. Don't just sit there and be stuck and just throw in the towel and say, I don't get it, okay? Let me know. It's literally what I'm here for. See you tomorrow.